Do you ever wonder if the love you gave was never love at all? You felt everything. You gave everything. You poured yourself into another human being like water into sand. And yet, you were left empty, invisible, like a soul no one remembered to see. What if that wasn't love? What if it was just your wound, reaching across the darkness, trying to find its way home? What if everything you thought was connection was actually just repetition? Let me show you something that might break your heart and then set you free. You didn't choose to be the empath. You became one, slowly, silently, in a home where emotions ran wild and love had conditions. We had to feel for everyone just to be safe. You learned that being kind meant disappearing. That love meant merging. That pain was the price of staying connected. And now, as an adult, you still call that love. You still call the ache in your chest loyalty. But your soul knows better. This video isn't here to fix you. It's here to help you remember. You were never broken. You just mistook survival for connection. What I'm about to share will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, about yourself, about why you keep choosing people who can't truly see you. But if you're ready to stop running from your own reflection, stay with me, because the truth isn't comfortable, but it's the only thing that will set you free. Let's begin with the hidden truth. Most empaths don't fall in love. They fall into patterns. Patterns that started in childhood. When you became the peacekeeper, the parent's emotional translator, the one who felt too much. You learned to love by rescuing, to be seen by serving, to belong by absorbing pain. And so now, in your relationships, you're not just loving, you're repeating. You're drawn to those who hurt because some part of you is still trying to finish the story, still trying to earn the love you never received by overgiving, overfeeling, overstaying. But here's the shadow truth. You're not in love with them. You're in love with who you think you'll become if you're enough to heal them. That's not love. That's self-erasure. Let me paint you a picture. Let me tell you about Jessica, 28 years old, works for a nonprofit because she genuinely wants to make the world better. The friend everyone calls when their life is falling apart because she always knows exactly what to say. Jessica met David at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday. Not because he swept her off her feet with grand romantic gestures, but because she noticed something others missed, the sadness hiding behind his easy smile, the way his shoulders carried weight that wasn't quite visible. I can help him, she thought, and that thought felt like coming alive. I can see what others can't see. I can love him in a way that actually heals. For 2 years, Jessica poured herself into that relationship like water into a broken cup. Every one of David's mood swings became her emotional project to solve. Every moment of his rare happiness felt like her personal victory. Every time he pulled away, which was often, she moved closer, convinced that her love could bridge any distance. She learned his triggers better than her own. She could predict his bad days with startling accuracy. She became fluent in the language of his pain while forgetting how to speak her own. Slowly, imperceptibly, Jessica began to disappear. Her friends stopped calling her for advice. Not because they didn't love her, but because Jessica was never really present anymore. She was always somewhere else, feeling someone else's feelings, trying to solve someone else's problems, living someone else's life. Her own dreams got smaller. Her own voice got quieter. Her own needs became optional. When David finally left, and he did leave, because wounded people often do when they start to heal and realize they don't need a caretaker anymore, he said something that shattered her world. I never really knew who you were underneath all that caring. It was like dating a mirror. And that's when Jessica realized the most terrifying truth of all. Neither did she. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But for the empath, there's something even more terrifying. Discovering that you've been hiding from yourself so completely that you don't even know who you are when you're not needed. This is emotional bondage. Not chains on the wrists, but invisible cords wrapped around the soul. And they whisper things like, I can't leave. They need me more than I need myself. I just feel everything so deeply. It's who I am. They're not bad people. They're just wounded, and I can see their potential. If I don't take care of this, who will? But what if I told you that every single one of those thoughts is your wound talking? What if I told you that the very thing you think makes you special, your ability to feel everyone else's pain, is actually the thing that's keeping you trapped? Here's what Jung understood about the shadow that most people miss. The shadow isn't just our dark impulses. It's also all the light we've disowned. For empaths, the shadow often contains their own needs, their own anger, their own right to take up space without earning it. You've made yourself so available to everyone else's darkness that you've become unavailable to your own light. Take a moment right now. Ask yourself, when was the last time someone stayed with you through your breakdown? When did someone last hold space for your pain without trying to fix it, change it, or make it about their own discomfort with difficult emotions? If that question makes your chest tight, if it makes you want to change the subject or think about someone else's problems instead, you're getting closer to the truth. Take a moment right now. Ask yourself, when was the last time someone stayed with you through your breakdown? When did someone last hold space for your pain without trying to fix it, change it, or make it about them? If that question makes you uncomfortable, you're getting closer to the truth. The empath's greatest fear isn't being abandoned. It's being seen, really seen, in all their messy, complicated, unhealed humanity. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that your worth was tied to your usefulness. Your love was measured by your availability. You became so good at reading the room that you forgot how to feel your own presence in it. This is what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to survive in the world. But your mask became so perfect, so convincing, that even you forgot it was there. Underneath that mask lives your shadow, all the parts of yourself you buried to be loved. Your anger, your boundaries, your right to be imperfect. You need to be held instead of always holding. And until you meet that shadow, you'll keep attracting people who mirror it back to you in the cruelest ways. Let me tell you about Michael. 32 years old, software engineer, grew up in a house where emotions were weapons and silence was survival. His mother used her feelings like weather systems, unpredictable storms that everyone had to navigate around. His father disappeared into work, into television, into anything that meant he didn't have to feel the chaos. Michael learned early that keeping everyone else calm meant he got to stay safe. He became an emotional detective, scanning faces for signs of distress, learning to anticipate needs before they were even voiced. In relationships, this made Michael feel special. Chosen. You're so understanding, his partners would say. You always know exactly what I need. You're not like other guys. And Michael felt proud. Finally, he had found his superpower. Finally, he mattered. Until the day his partner turned to him in the middle of yet another conversation about her problems and said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm dating a therapist, not a boyfriend. I don't need you to fix me, Michael. I need you to just be real with me." And Michael realized with horror, he didn't know how to be real. He had become so skilled at reflecting back what others needed that he had lost all sense of what he actually felt, wanted, or believed. He was a mirror with nothing behind it. This is the shadow that haunts every empath. The fear that if you stop being useful, you'll discover you're not actually lovable. That if you stop giving, there will be nothing left worth receiving. But here's what Jung knew, what he spent his entire life trying to teach. You cannot love from an empty cup. You cannot give what you do not have. And you cannot build authentic connection on a foundation of self-erasure. This is where the dream breaks, where the fantasy finally crumbles, where you realize, with a pain so sharp it takes your breath away, that you were never actually loved for your essence. You were loved for how useful your empathy was. You were loved for your ability to absorb pain, to understand without being understood, to give without receiving. Your intuition became a performance. Your care became a currency. Your very soul became a service you provided to others. And slowly, so slowly you didn't even notice it happening, you disappeared. The people you loved didn't fall in love with you. They fell in love with how you made them feel about themselves. They fell in love with the version of themselves they became in your presence, understood, accepted, healed. But you, the real you, with your own wounds and dreams and complicated inner world, you were invisible. even to yourself. This is the moment where most empaths want to turn away, want to go back to the comfortable lie that they just need to find the right person who won't take advantage of their giving nature. But the truth is more painful and more liberating than that. Until you stop abandoning yourself, you will always attract people who abandon you too. The mirror must shift. The pattern must break. And it has to start with you. Jung understood something that most people still don't. We don't attract what we want. We attract what we are. And if you're someone who has learned to love by disappearing, you will magnetize people who need someone to disappear for them. This is your shadow work. Not just acknowledging your darkness, but reclaiming all the light you've given away. Walk with me back to the moment you first left yourself. Maybe you were 7 years old, and your parents were screaming at each other across the kitchen table. And you learned that being the good one made the chaos stop, if only for a moment. Maybe you were 12, and your best friend was crying about her parents' divorce. And suddenly you mattered in a way you'd never felt before. Suddenly you were important, needed, special. Maybe you were 16, and someone told you that you were too intense, too emotional, too much. So you learned to make yourself smaller, quieter, more palatable. Somewhere in your story, you made a trade. You gave up your authenticity for belonging. You gave up your truth for approval. You gave up yourself for the promise of love. But here's what no one told you then. What you need to hear now. That wasn't love. That was a transaction. And you've been trying to complete that same transaction ever since. Let's sit with the hardest truth of all. Every person who left you after you gave them everything. Every relationship that ended with you feeling used and unseen. Every connection that felt more like a job than a joy. They were all showing you something you weren't ready to see. They were showing you that you were trying to love from a place of woundedness. That you were offering connection while hiding behind a mask of endless understanding. That you were asking them to fill a void that was never theirs to fill. You called it love, but it was loneliness wearing a disguise. You called it empathy, but it was codependence with a spiritual name. You called it caring, but it was a desperate attempt to control the outcome. To ensure that this time, you wouldn't be left behind. This is the shadow truth that Jung spent his life illuminating. We see in others what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. You were drawn to wounded people not because you're naturally compassionate, but because their obvious pain distracted you from your own hidden wounds. You try to heal them because facing your own brokenness felt too overwhelming. You stayed too long in relationships that hurt you because leaving would mean admitting that your love wasn't enough. And if your love wasn't enough, then what value did you have? Here's the devastating realization that every empath must face. The very quality you thought made you special, your ability to feel everything, to understand everyone, to love unconditionally, was actually a trauma response. It was the way a child learned to survive in an environment where love was conditional, where approval had to be earned, where your emotional needs were either ignored or seen as a burden. You didn't become an empath because you're naturally more evolved or spiritually gifted. You became an empath because hypervigilance to others' emotions was how you stayed safe in a world that felt dangerous. And now, as an adult, you're still running that same program. Still scanning for emotional threats. Still believing that if you can just understand them deeply enough, love them completely enough, they'll finally give you the safety and security you've been searching for since childhood. But here's what Jung knew, what he tried to teach anyone willing to listen. The thing you're looking for out there doesn't exist out there. It can only be found inside. And it can only be found when you finally stop running from yourself and start running toward yourself instead. The people who trigger you the most aren't your enemies. They're your teachers. They're showing you exactly where you still need to heal. And the love you keep chasing in all the wrong places, it's not out there waiting to be found. It's in here. It's been waiting inside you all along. This is the death that Jung called necessary. Not the death of the body, but the death of the false self. The death of the version of you that learned to survive by being indispensable. The death of the story that says you have to earn love through service. Understanding through self-sacrifice. It's terrifying because this false self has been your identity for so long. It's been the source of whatever worth you thought you had. Without it, who are you? Without your empathy as a superpower, without your ability to save others, without your endless capacity to understand and forgive, what's left? Everything. Everything is left. The you that exists when you're not performing understanding. The you that has opinions and boundaries and needs. The you that can feel angry without immediately trying to understand why the other person hurt you. The you that can love without losing yourself in the process. But first, you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing who that person is. You have to be willing to feel the grief of all the years you spent loving others more than you love yourself. You have to be willing to rage at all the people who took your empathy for granted, who used your understanding as a weapon against your own needs. And then, when the storm passes, and it will pass, you have to be willing to start over, to build a new kind of love, a new kind of connection, a new kind of life, one where you matter just as much as everyone else you've been trying to save. Now comes the soft part, the part where you don't need to fight or justify or explain. You just need to call yourself home, not with perfection, not with loud declarations, but with quiet truth. You don't have to earn it anymore. You don't have to feel everything to be worthy. You don't have to heal them to be loved. Begin with your body, your throat, tight from words never spoken. Your back, heavy from carrying what was never yours. Your breath, shallow from always bracing for impact. Breathe. Let grief come. Let rage rise. Let silence settle. Because this is where you begin again, not as the empath who saves, but as the soul who stays. What would it feel like to stop scanning every room for emotional weather patterns? What would it feel like to walk into a space and check in with yourself first? How am I feeling right now? What do I need? What would feel good for me? What would it feel like to have a conversation where you didn't automatically become an emotional detective, trying to figure out what the other person needed from you? What would it feel like to just be present with your own experience? This is the work Jung called individuation. The process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you think you need to be to survive. It's not about becoming selfish or uncaring. It's about learning to care for yourself with the same tenderness you've always shown others. It starts small. It starts with noticing when you automatically ask, "How are you?" before checking in with how you are. It starts with pausing before you offer advice and asking yourself, "Is this actually helpful? Or am I just trying to feel useful?" It starts with sitting in the discomfort of not being the one with all the answers. Not being the one who fixes everything. Not being the emotional caretaker who keeps everyone else afloat. And yes, it will feel strange. Yes, some people will be confused by your newfound boundaries. Yes, some relationships will not survive your decision to stop abandoning yourself for others. But what you'll discover is this: the people who truly love you, not your empathy, not your usefulness, but you, will not just tolerate your wholeness. They'll celebrate it. Remember Jessica, whose story I shared earlier. 6 months after David left, something unexpected happened. Instead of immediately jumping into another relationship where she could feel needed again, she made a different choice. She started therapy, not to become a better partner for someone else, but to become a better friend to herself. For the first time in her adult life, she began to ask herself questions that had nothing to do with anyone else's well-being. What do I actually enjoy doing when no one else is around? What makes me laugh? What makes me feel alive in my own skin? What would I choose if I wasn't afraid of disappointing someone? At first, the answers didn't come easily. She realized she had become so accustomed to defining herself in relation to others that she barely knew who she was in solitude. But slowly, carefully, she began to remember. She remembered that she loved hiking alone, something she'd stopped doing because David found it boring. She remembered that she had strong opinions about books and movies and politics, opinions she'd learned to soften so others wouldn't feel challenged. She remembered that she actually enjoyed conflicts sometimes, not the destructive kind, but the kind that comes from two people who care enough about each other to fight for understanding rather than just agreeing to keep the peace. Most surprisingly, she remembered that she was funny. Not just understanding and wise, but genuinely belly laugh funny. In a way she'd hidden because wounded people often don't want laughter. They want solemnity. They want someone to match their pain. And as Jessica began to reclaim these lost parts of herself, something magical happened. She stopped attracting people who needed saving. She stopped feeling responsible for everyone else's emotional state. She stopped seeing other people's pain as her personal assignment. Michael took a different path, but it led to the same destination. He started journaling, not about his relationships or other people's problems, but about his own inner landscape. Every morning, he would sit with his coffee and ask himself, what do I actually think about this? What do I want? What would I choose if I wasn't afraid of disappointing someone? At first, the pages were mostly blank. He realized with shock that he had no idea what his own voice sounded like, when it wasn't reflecting someone else's needs back to them. But gradually, word by word, he began to remember himself. He discovered that he had strong feelings about music, about art, about how he wanted to spend his weekends. He realized he'd been saying yes to social events he hated, because he thought that's what good partners did. He found that he actually preferred deep, one-on-one conversations to large group gatherings. But he'd been pretending to be more extroverted because his partners seemed to expect it. Most importantly, he discovered that he had anger. Real, legitimate anger. About all the times his needs had been dismissed. All the times he'd been expected to understand without being understood. All the times he'd been loved for his service rather than his soul. At first, this anger scared him. Empaths often fear their own anger because they've been taught that good people don't get angry, that understanding people don't hold grudges, that evolved people always forgive. But Jung knew something different. Anger is often just love that has nowhere to go. And Michael's anger was actually his love for himself, finally demanding to be heard. Here's something beautiful that Jung understood. Your wound is also your gift, but only when you stop using it to abandon yourself. Your empathy, when it's not driven by fear of abandonment, is indeed a superpower. Your ability to feel deeply, when it includes your own feelings, creates the possibility for authentic intimacy. Your understanding of pain, when it's not used to enable others' dysfunction, can be a bridge to real healing. You don't need to become less feeling. You need to become more boundaried. You don't need to care less. You need to include yourself in that care. You don't need to stop seeing others clearly. You need to start seeing yourself with the same clarity. The very qualities that made you vulnerable to being used and taken for granted are the same qualities that will make you an extraordinary partner when you learn to love from fullness instead of emptiness. But first, you have to fill your own cup. You have to learn to be the kind of friend to yourself that you've always been to others. You have to practice the radical act of staying present with your own experience, even when someone else's pain is calling for your attention. Here is the truth that no one ever told you. The truth that could have saved you years of heartbreak if only someone had been brave enough to speak it. Real love does not require your disappearance. It doesn't demand your exhaustion. It doesn't feel like drowning in someone else's emotional ocean. Real love holds space for both people. Real love has rhythm. Sometimes you give, sometimes you receive, and both feel natural. Real love begins with you learning to love yourself the way you've always loved others. Completely, unconditionally, without requiring perfection. You don't need to be the healer, the strong one, the endlessly understanding partner who never has bad days or complicated feelings. You don't need to chase approval by swimming in other people's pain. You just need to stand still and feel the ground beneath feet you forgot were yours. You're not here to be a sponge, absorbing what others cannot hold. You are not here to be an emotional vending machine, dispensing understanding and care to anyone who puts in the right coins. You're not here to be the answer to someone else's emptiness, the solution to someone else's wounds. You're here to be a mirror, but not the kind that only reflects back what others want to see. The kind that shows both light and shadow, beauty and flaw, truth and complexity. Clear, radiant whole. Imagine, for a moment, what it would feel like to meet someone who doesn't just tolerate your boundaries, they respect them. Someone who doesn't need you to feel their feelings for them. Who can hold their own pain without making it your responsibility to fix. Imagine being seen not for what you can do, but for who you are when you're not doing anything at all. Imagine being loved not because you're useful, but because your very existence brings them joy. Imagine having conversations where you don't have to monitor the other person's emotional temperature, where you can speak your truth without immediately scanning their face for signs of disappointment or rejection. Imagine loving someone who celebrates your complexity instead of expecting you to be simple, who honors your depth instead of asking you to be shallow, who treasures your sensitivity instead of treating it like a burden they have to manage. This isn't fantasy. This isn't too much to ask for. This is what becomes possible when you stop abandoning yourself for others. When you stop trying to earn love through service and start being loved through presence. When you stop trying to be perfect and start being real. When you stop trying to be needed and start being wanted, truly wanted for exactly who you are. If you take only one thing from this journey we've shared, let it be this. Start small. Start today. Start with this next breath. Notice when you automatically say, "I'm fine," when someone asks how you are, even when you're not fine. Notice when you ask about someone else's day before checking in with your own inner weather. Notice when you feel guilty for having needs, for taking up space, for not being endlessly available. And in those moments, those small, seemingly insignificant moments, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what would it feel like to tell the truth right now? What would it feel like to choose myself just this once? Start with tiny acts of self-loyalty. Taking 5 minutes alone before you're available to others. Saying, "Let me think about it," instead of immediately saying yes. Asking for what you need without a 3-paragraph explanation of why you deserve it. Practice feeling your own feelings without immediately trying to understand what they mean for someone else. Practice being in your own presence without needing to be useful, productive, or helpful. Practice the revolutionary act of mattering to yourself as much as everyone else matters to you. You can love and still walk away when love becomes self-erasure. You can care deeply and still choose yourself when caring becomes self-destruction. You can feel everything without losing yourself in the flood of sensation. This is not selfishness. This is not cruelty. This is not abandoning your empathic gifts. This is learning to love from a place of wholeness instead of woundedness. This is discovering that you can care for others without caretaking them. This is remembering that the most loving thing you can do is show up as your authentic self, rather than as a reflection of what you think others need. And one day, maybe sooner than you think, maybe when you've stopped desperately searching, you'll meet someone who doesn't just need your light, but honors your darkness too. Someone who sees your scars not as something to heal, but as proof of your resilience, your survival, your incredible capacity to transform pain into wisdom. Someone who doesn't make you feel like you're too much or not enough, but exactly right, exactly as you are, exactly as you're becoming. Someone who doesn't love you despite your complexity, but because of it, who doesn't want you to be smaller so they can be bigger, but celebrates taking up space together. Until then, and this is the most important part, be the one who stays with you. Be the one who holds space for your own breaking and your own healing. Be the one who sees your own beauty, your own worth, your own magnificent, complicated, perfectly imperfect humanity. Be the one who finally understands. You were never too much. You were just giving yourself to people who were too little. You were just in the wrong rooms with the wrong people who couldn't handle the fullness of who you are. The right love is coming. But first, it's already here. It's been waiting inside you all along. Patient as sunlight, steady as your own heartbeat. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to the love that never asks you to disappear. Welcome home to the life that's been waiting for you to finally, fully arrive. You are here. You matter. You are enough. Right now. Just as you are, just as you're becoming. Welcome home.